the graveyard shift, but I'm hugely impressed that you're all still here, and I can promise you, you're not wasting your time. We've got a terrific session for you this afternoon, 2 terrific speakers. This is session T2S3. Why am I making a thing of that? I'm making a thing of that because if you've been paying any attention to Twitter, you might have seen that with the hashtag T2S3, I've been pushing out some advance notice of the discussions that I know we're going to be having today, and inviting some comments and questions for Megan and for Nicola. So in fact, when I got up this morning, I posted a question on Twitter, just inviting people to comment on what does the term self-directed learning mean to you? And I said, tweet me your thoughts. So an answer came flooding in. You don't watch that program. You don't listen to that program then. Mrs. Trellis. So somebody, Dan Hewitt came back and said, for me it's when the individual decides what I want or need to learn, how I'm going to learn it, and then take action to do so. It doesn't mean it isn't supported by others, but it's the motivation, method, and action that primarily lies with me. Christine Locher said, for me it's the adult bit in adult learning. We sometimes forget that, and we really need to bring that back. Nick Ribeiro said, I've been wondering how much self-directed there is with the semantic web. And he goes on to explain that, fortunately. Personalization, predictive, prescriptive, etc., etc. Simply create, suggested in terms of work, me being the self, deciding and understanding my knowledge and skill gaps to then proactively seek information, people, resources that will help me to direct myself. So that's, I don't know how that sits with your thinking about what self-directed learning is. I think your views and your opinions will be informed and hopefully enlightened by our 2 speakers today. First up is Megan Corker. I nearly did it. You know that thing when you say, when you've got it in your head, don't say. I nearly gave you a Twitter handle there. So Megan is digital learning consultant at the NHS Business Authority. She's digital learning consultant with 10 years experience. She's currently working with a learning and organization development team for the NHS Business Service Authority. She combines technology with the need for social contact via exploration, discussion, reflection, and thinking time. Her work is grounded in the principles of encouraging colleagues to be curious about themselves, self-aware about their own behaviors, motivations, strength, and development opportunities. She's very big on, and you'll see in the presentation, organizations stop telling with a parental-child relationship their employees what they should be learning, but engaging colleagues in exploring their own values. And if any of you were at Christine Locher's session at lunchtime, that may resonate. Exploring their own values and growth by understanding what colleagues really care about to enable the growth of the organization. So that's Megan, and she's up first. She will be followed by, so beautifully rehearsed, Nicola Braden. And Nicola is the Global Learning Innovation Director at Unilever PLC. Currently leading the Global Learning Innovation and Standards team that manages innovation, is integrating, supporting tech, platforms, and talent recruitment, performance, and workforce planning teams to develop a holistic people experience. She partners with the business to close key capability gaps in order to deliver Unilever's strategic ambition. Multimedia delivery methods, including virtual learning, social learning, integration of MOOCs, and other emerging media, e-learning and blended classroom learning. There's a load of options and opportunities in there within the organization for the individual to step up and take some ownership of how they want to receive and participate in that learning. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, and that is Megan Corker. Thank you.
Right, is this on? Is this on now? Yeah? Right, okay. I've been told I've got to close this presentation and open another one, so just bear with me a second. Help! So I've lost the mouse. It's working. Excellent. Right, so hello everyone. As Niall said, my name is Megan Corker. I work for the NHS Business Services Authority. We're an arm's length body of the NHS, so we have quite a convoluted name, but we do some really good work, and we've got some really good eggs working with us as well, especially our new chief exec, who's really brilliant, and he's bringing some really good things to us as a business. My role is Learning and Development Consultant, and I work within an OD team. And in OD, what we quite like to do is ask some of the big questions before we start talking about the little things. So what I'm going to talk about, first of all, is kind of one of the bigger questions when we talk about self-directed learning. So before we start talking about self-directed learning in kind of more detail, I want you to start having a think about, and I'm going to ask you to talk to the person next to you in a moment, when it comes to learning for work, what type of organisation do you work for? If you currently don't work for an organisation, maybe you are a consultant, maybe you work for kind of small business or a startup, but it's worth thinking about, as an organisation, do you think that you, when it comes to learning for work, do you think that you are a telling organisation, or do you think that you are a thinking organisation? Now, before I ask you to have a little discussion about that, we're going to have a look at some of the symptoms of telling organisations and some of the symptoms of thinking organisations, so you can have a think about which one you might be. Okay, so some of the symptoms of a telling organisation. If you find yourself having these types of conversations in your business, if you overhear these types of conversations in your business, the chances are you work for a telling organisation. And if you find yourself overhearing these types of conversations, having these types of conversations, so I work within a corporate services learning and development team, so people kind of come to us, and you have certain types of conversations. So if this looks familiar to you, you might be more of a thinking organisation. So you've got a minute. I'm going to reduce it down to a minute just so we keep things tight. If you can have a chat for 1 minute with the person next to you about whether or not you think you work for a telling organisation or a thinking organisation. Are you happy to do the countdown now? Excellent.
Yeah, either way.
Okay, everyone, if you can come back. It's good to hear lots of chatter. So you have literally had a minute. That goes pretty quickly. So I'm not going to ask anyone to share, but I suspect, and I guess, show of hands maybe, I suspect quite a few of you are feeling like there's a bit of both going on in your organisation. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, a bit of both. Okay. So, oh, sorry, I've broken it. There we go. Right, okay, so a bit more about what we mean by a telling organisation. So telling organisations tend to dictate stuff from the top, and in some ways they're more traditional organisations. So the leadership team and corporate services make decisions about what learning is going to happen in the organisation. It tends to be based on their understanding of strategy, what growth the organisation needs to make, and a lot of sort of mandatory stuff. If you're in a certain type of role within the organisation, you might be told you need to do this learning and this is what you're going to do. If you're a manager in the organisation, you're probably told that you need to attend some sort of management programme, or you're going to need to do some online management training. And it tends to be sort of a bit sheep dippy. I don't know if anyone's heard of that term before when it comes to learning at work, but sheep dipping, as in everyone in this type of role needs to do this specific thing. And that's kind of, one of the symptoms of a telling organisation. And this is really kind of, the idea of a telling organisation is based on a really sort of old theory that a lot of you have probably heard of. When we're talking about transactional analysis, Eric Byrne back in the 1960s talked about the parent-child relationship. And a lot of traditional telling organisations operate with this parent-child relationship. So the leadership team and the corporate services tell people what they're going to do, and people go, right, cool, that's fine, I'll go off and do that. And that tends to be the nature of a telling organisation. I suppose what I've just talked about there seems kind of negative. I use the term traditional. I guess that's kind of got negative connotations. But actually, it's questionable whether a telling organisation is bad, because it's not always. There's quite a lot of people who work in telling organisations who value having the sort of parent-child relationship where they're basically told what's going to happen. They don't have to think about it for themselves. The leadership team do the thinking because they're paid more than we are, so, they make the decisions, that's what they're paid to do. And it creates levels of certainty for people. So I know for myself, when you kind of go into a new organisation and you're kind of given your induction pack and you're told this is what you have to do for the next 3 weeks and this is the learning that you're going to have to do, it's quite nice. You don't have to think about it. It's like, oh, right, great, okay, brilliant. And it creates a level of certainty for you. It gives people confidence in the organisation. So that feeling that people at the top are actually thinking about this stuff, and we're all supposed to kind of do as they say, and it's like, yeah, great, I have confidence in the organisation that I work for. So these are all benefits of working for a telling organisation, so it's worth thinking about. It's not just a negative thing. I suppose what's so wrong with working in a telling organisation, we wouldn't be having this conversation about self-directed learning if working for a telling organisation was really brilliant and then there was no issue with it. I suppose if everything was great, we wouldn't need to change it. So if you felt like in that conversation you just had that you were kind of thinking, okay, I can recognise this telling thing going on, you might find, if you work in a learning and development role, that you experience lack of engagement. So you kind of find you're telling people what to do a lot of the time and they don't particularly like it. People find that they don't have time to do what you're asking them to do. People just kind of aren't really interested. They feel like it's a box-ticking exercise. So there are issues with working for a telling organisation. You'll see in the picture there that people are experiencing that their job is far more important than learning, and you're having to do a lot of the work as the corporate learning team. There are also questions around whether learning even takes place in a telling organisation. So people do as they're told, but are they actually learning anything? I guess that would be a question. So when we're talking about a thinking organisation, did anyone feel like their organisation was a kind of purely thinking organisation? Anybody have that conversation and feel like they could raise their hand? No? Oh, maybe one over there. Okay, yeah. So a thinking organisation looks like an organisation where people have more autonomy over their learning. They understand what the business is trying to do, so even if they work in sort of fairly kind of, I guess, menial roles, you could say, they have an appreciation of what the organisation is trying to achieve. They understand the purpose of growth in the organisation, and they understand the point of doing the learning. They also care about what the organisation is trying to achieve, and they're not victims of the organisation. So often in a telling organisation, because you've got the parent-child relationship, people feel like victims of that, and it's like, oh, I'm being told what to do all the time by the leadership team, and actually the people in a thinking organisation feel a bit more like they're enabled and like they care about what the organisation is trying to do. There are some methods, I guess, to learning in a thinking organisation rather. So some of those methods are things like coaching, they're things like discussion groups, they're things like, my colleague likes to use the term mooching. So going online and having a mooch is the term that she uses. And I think that's a sort of really important thing to do because people are thinking for themselves about what they might want to do. So I suppose what's so brilliant about a thinking organisation is if we're talking about self-directed learning, is that what we're trying to move towards in terms of learning and development? So what is so good about a thinking organisation? It helps people to think about learning. It teaches techniques rather than teaching subjects. So teaching techniques such as critical thinking, problem solving, so that people can go away and take those things with them and actually use them in other situations rather than training out individual subjects. So I know, for example, management training, people can be trained on various things such as how to do an appraisal, or how to deal with a member of staff who's difficult, or how to deal with a member of staff who's talented. And actually, what you'll find is that people are using very similar techniques and abilities to deal with all of those things, and you don't need to teach each one individually. You can create an environment where they feel like they're developing those skills in things like problem solving, in things like communication, in things like active listening. So you're creating tool belts for people rather than individual subjects. Our job, I suppose, in a thinking organisation, so you might think, what's the point of corporate learning and development if we're in a thinking organisation and everyone's thinking for themselves? But our role is to support people to get there, and it's to support people and enable them to be in that place. So often what you find in an organisation that is a traditional kind of telling organisation, they will try to bring in methods to help to release the kind of corporate service from having to do everything, and we're trying to get away from telling people what to do all the time, and people feel like they're not enabled and like they're disengaged. And one of the things a telling organisation that wants to move away from that will do is fly in something called self-directed learning. And there are symptoms of organisations that are in between those two phases. So a telling organisation has symptoms, a thinking organisation has symptoms, but an organisation that's somewhere in between also has symptoms. And flying in self-directed learning has its advantages, but you have to work to get people to where you want them to be. So I suppose we're talking here a little bit about the kind of 70-20-10 model, but there are quite a few things that could go wrong in this situation if you just kind of throw in some self-directed learning options for people. So one of the things you may experience here in a situation where you're going from telling to thinking are issues with readiness. And in OD, we talk about readiness quite a lot. It's about an organisation feeling like something makes sense to them. So we might have all gone away and thought about, this is what we're going to do, this is the right thing to do for the organisation. But for the people within the organisation, they don't necessarily get what it is that you're trying to do. So people are waiting to be told, they're expecting to be told what's going to happen, and you're kind of not doing that anymore. You're saying, right, we're going to support you with some self-directed learning, here's your platform, off you go. And that's kind of like, okay, great. But you've potentially got a bunch of people reacting in this way where you're expecting them to suddenly be the learning expert, and they're not. So you may kind of start to feel like some of the symptoms of a telling organisation going to a thinking organisation are people telling you that there's no training. And I know I've experienced this in organisations before where people are sort of saying, but I used to attend training, I used to get training, I used to be told what to do. There used to be a programme of things that I used to be able to kind of go off and do, and I'm not being told what to do anymore. And there's a kind of a confusion, I guess, around that. And one of the most profound artifacts, so in OD we talk about artifacts quite a lot, which are basically sort of things that pop up which tell you about the culture of an organisation. And one of the most profound artifacts of a telling organisation that kind of takes away the telling bit and tries to move towards thinking is that the comfort blanket of training, if you like, which is what this is ripped away from people. And people start having a reaction to that. And it's not called the comfort blanket of training to be derogatory. It's called that because people get more from training than just the knowledge of the subject. So people get a confidence when they walk away from being told what to do. People feel like they kind of know what's happening, and it's a confidence feeling of, oh, well, I know what's happening. Oops. So how can you move towards being a thinking organisation if you are currently a telling organisation, but without taking the comfort blanket of training and kind of lugging it out the window? Ideally, what you want to do is bring in the self-directed learning, but take your comfort blanket with you. So you're not ripping it away from people. You're not saying, no, you're not getting anything. And that's what we've tried to do as an organisation with the help of a self-directed learning platform. So this is kind of the practical stuff about if you feel like in that conversation that you just had with the person next to you, that you are more of a telling organisation, maybe a bit of thinking going on, but generally quite sort of telling. There are some practical things that you can do. So the first thing I would suggest you do, step one, is get people to start thinking about learning for work. So what do I need to learn? Why do I need to learn it? What do I want to learn? So some of this is about your career progression as an individual. What does your team need to do? But also why. I think I have moments sometimes where I think people just forget to explain to other people about why something's important, and it's just kind of assumed that they know. Why is learning at work important? And I think that's something that we as learning and development need to start doing. That's our job. The enabling bit is explaining to people. This step one, is an ongoing process, so this isn't necessarily going to be easy, but you are going to have to keep doing it. And some of this is just about having conversations with people, challenging what they say, and talk about why something's important and why they should start thinking about it. The next step is to get yourself a supportive self-directed learning platform. So at the BSA, we use Virtual Ashridge. We found that it's a really good platform. Obviously, there are loads of different platforms that you can use, but this one's really great. We have 3,500 staff. We have a lot of staff who have a lot of experience, who are highly qualified, and Virtual Ashridge offers something that's a bit kind of higher level, I guess. I think some of our managers find that there's some online learning out there that's a little bit patronising, and Virtual Ashridge kind of gets away from that a little bit. It's also quite a supportive platform because it helps you to do self-assessments, it helps you to do the thinking when you're on it. So you can kind of support people to do that with your platform. And then step 3 is to create a half and half format. So we've got our comfort blanket still there, he's there, but people are having conversations. So what I would suggest, and this has worked really well for us, is you get people to come in and discuss the skills gaps that they've maybe got, and you can help them. Set up some resources, set up some learning paths for them, and get them together and facilitate a discussion. So start asking some why questions. Are we doing the right thing? As managers, are we doing what we should be doing? Let's challenge ourselves, let's self-reflect. And again, you're teaching skills around self-reflection. We also started using learning journals to help people to kind of get to grips with reflecting on what they've learnt. And then step 4 really was about pushing the boundaries. So I think this is kind of maybe once you've got a bit more sort of into the conversations about people thinking for themselves. Step 4 really was about challenging people a bit more. So some of our managers, they might have been doing things in a certain way for 20 years. Actually, we want them to reflect on how they do things. We want them to reflect on what they're doing. And we can help them to do that in a trusting environment. We can help them to do that in a confidential environment. And then finally, I think, remember the thinking organisation principles. So this is about not telling people the answers. So you'll have a group of people in a room with you. It's important to make sure that you're not just sort of giving them the answers so that they then go back into the passive parent-child thing again. Ask them questions, ask them why, ask them to bring something to the room, ask them to read something before they come to the room. Their job is to interpret what they've read and apply it in the real world, and then bring them back after they've applied it in the real world. We've found that action learning is quite good for that. I don't know if anyone's tried that method, but it helps because it's in a live environment rather than a sort of theory-based stuff. And then people can talk about what's really going on for them and then go off and make changes to what they do and then come back and say, oh, that didn't really work, or yeah, that worked. And you're helping people with the self-directed learning platform. Okay, so if you are interested in Virtual Ashridge as a platform, they're on stand L22 downstairs. I've got some references there if anyone wants to have a look, and a bit of extra reading, and happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
So apparently I have to escape out of here. Never an easy test, just bear with me 1 second. This is nominative determinism. Mike on the mics is going to help me get back to the desktop on this laptop. Great, so good afternoon everyone. I'm Nicola Braden and I'm the Global Learning Innovation and Standards Director at Unilever. So for those of you who are wondering what Unilever is all about, we're a very purpose-led organisation. So the purpose of our business is to make sustainable living commonplace. And that reaches not just through our products, but actually through sustainable livelihoods and sustainable careers for people. And that's very relevant to what we're talking about here. In case you're thinking, well, I know Unilever, but I'm not really sure what they do. Well, we're a very large global organisation, as you can see here, with a lot in developing countries. And if you still don't know what we do, along with about 2.5 billion people worldwide, you've probably used one of our products today. So we've got about 400 different brands that we have around the world. So the question was asked on Twitter, what do we mean by self-directed learning? So my team is about innovation, which includes experimentation. So we're going to do an experiment here in the room. So the first thing I want you to do is think about the last time you needed to learn something nothing to do with your job. right? So it could be, I need to learn how to fix my iPhone. I need to learn how to train for a marathon. I need to learn how to bake the perfect souffle. So has everyone got something in their head they can think of recently that they needed to learn outside of work? Yep, perfect. Okay, everyone, if you can stand up. This is an activity, you see. You actually have to move in order to earn your party afterwards. So think about how you learnt that. So if you decided to go on a face-to-face course somewhere, then sit down. A few people doing that. If you went to a library or a bookshop and bought a book made out of real trees and read that, then sit down. Not many, I see. And if you ask somebody that you know in real life, a friend, a neighbour, whoever it might be, for their advice, then sit down. A few more of you. If you went on Google and looked for a chat site, a how-to guide, or watched a video, something similar to that, then sit down. Perfect. And we've got a few others. So tell us, how did you do it if it wasn't through one of those? One or two of you just shout out. Twitter, perfect. Okay, so you went online and asked a question. Okay, great. Any others? YouTube. Okay, perfect. So thank you, everyone. You can sit down, the rest of you. So the results of that experiment are everyone knows how to do self-directed learning, right? That's the essence of it. You figured out what you needed to learn. You figured out how you could learn that, and you used quite a wide variety of ways of doing that, and you took action. So outside of work, vast majority of us do this and do this all the time. What I think sometimes happens in organisations, and was certainly true for some people at Unilever, is a learned helplessness, right? So I've learned that I need to wait until someone sends me on a course or mandates a piece of learning to me online. Other than that, I'm pretty passive. And we know that that really needed to change. So here's the story of how we have changed and are continuing to change that. So the first thing, and this is something Megan talked about, is start with why, right? What's in it for me? Why should I change? Even if our habits aren't great, we have a tendency to keep doing them. So something needs to be motivating. So what we did is meet your learners where they are, meet your people where they are. So what do they like about what's happening now? So here were some of the things that we got back. And we got this from a whole variety of sources, and it was pretty consistent around the world. So they like the fact that Unilever has always been a business since our very beginning that's focused on developing people, right? You go there, you feel like you learn things, so that's great. And they also like some of the courses that they've been on as well. So some people had some very good learning experiences. When we talked to them about what don't you like and what's not working for you, we got a lot more answers, right? So not surprisingly, and you can see some of them here. There were some very practical things from people. So I'm in a small country. Courses aren't run face-to-face every day here for me. And maybe I don't get the time or the budget in order to be able to travel to go to them. So that learning's inaccessible to me. It takes me ages to find what I want. I don't know what I should be learning, right? There is this piece around, well, what does the business need me to be good at, rather than me randomly thinking of things to go away and learn about, and how am I doing? So ask the question, why? What's in it for me? And you're starting with the, well, what do they like? What do they not like? You also might need to help them. We certainly did a little bit, because if you think about those, a lot of them are very immediate needs for people, practical needs. They're thinking about something to learn this afternoon. But there's also a wider context here, and this goes back to the piece about sustainable skills, livelihoods, and careers. I'm going to play you a very short video now that we've put together for use within our business, and let's hope that it works. So hopefully you can see what we were shooting for there, right? This is about a wider context for people. We are really passionate about helping people have sustainable livelihoods and sustainable careers. And for a company of our size and scale, where we've got around 140,000 people in well over 100 countries, if we were to rely on the old way of doing things, of sending people on courses and mandating learning, we would need an absolute army of people. And like I'm sure most of your organisations, we just don't have that, and we still probably wouldn't meet the need. So there's a real compelling reason for all of us as individuals within the business to change, but also from a business perspective around what is a sustainable way of doing this. So we said, well, what's the number one problem, right? We'll have a whole laundry list of problems here, so where do we start? So find your number one problem and fix it. And for us in Unilever, it was this: having one place to go for all learning. We have a multitude of systems. There was stuff sat internally, externally, all over the place. So for us, this was the number one problem that we needed to solve for in the very early stages. The next thing is then just make it laughably easily for people to get started. I mean, really, we're all busy, and anything that starts to become what might seem like a small barrier can be enough to stop you moving forward, particularly when you're asking people to change. So, first of all, don't bother trying to tell people where to go to find it. Put it where they go anyway, right? So I mean by that, you know, your intranet. Where would they expect to go? And make sure that you're there and you've got presence there. Don't send them on a wild goose chase around an organisation to find it. And make that entry point as easy as possible. So single sign-on for us was a no-brainer. Anything where you've got to start remembering new passwords, that's going to turn off most people pretty quickly. The other thing that we did is we already know a lot about our people, and I'm sure your organisations do as well. This is in service of the personalisation, which I know also came up on the Twitter piece. So if you already know it and it's of relevance to what they might be wanting to learn and their profile, then bring it in, get it into the system so you're not asking them to repeat it, right? And that immediately means you've done some of the work for them. And have something relevant ready for them to learn. So we now have literally millions of pieces of content. Internally stuff that we've either bought or created ourselves. It's into the hundreds of thousands. That can be a bit overwhelming. I'll talk about that in a minute. But make sure that the moment they go in, bang, there's something there relevant straight away for them to get them started and get them really engaged with this. So you're kind of pump priming. In terms of what now technology can do for us, of course we all know it's absolutely huge and the possibilities really are endless. We needed to be careful that we didn't overwhelm people, right? Well, there's too much. So you do this in steps and you do it in stages. So really try and avoid the overwhelm by gradually introducing new features or even just talking about them. The features might be there, but perhaps you haven't just really talked about them very much. And every one of those needs a why. Why should I bother, right? So you've got to really help them understand, how's this going to help you? What's it going to do for you? Stay very close to your learners, because we all know people don't always behave in the way that we expect them to, and something that perhaps as a learning or an HR professional seems obvious really may not be. So stay really close, and I'll talk a bit about how we do that, so that as soon as if there are problems or people are struggling with something, you're ironing it out really quickly. And this was really important for us. This essentially is shown as a pyramid, but essentially you can look at it as a ladder as well. Where did we start? And you've got to build the business case side of things. So what's in it for your organisation? At the end of the day, they're paying for people's time, they're investing in the technology. You need to make sure that it's mutually beneficial, and that makes it sustainable. So as I said, on both sides, it was let's just get all our content into one place. So we've introduced Degreed as an LXP that sits across all our various content sources. So no one needs to worry about the back end. They have one single point of entry. Then we started really moving into now how do we, from the individual's perspective, start to build the personalisation for them, bring in more information. It will come as no surprise to any of you that works in large organisations. As we did this, there were more learning systems out there than learning knew about, right? So suddenly we're getting calls from around the world of, you know, we've got this library of e-books out in China. Can we integrate that? Yes, we can. So there's still work always to be done on that. and really starting to build the habit of learning. It's one thing going in once and having a great experience, but how do you keep people coming back? And from the business perspective, really getting in there on the performance support side, so really making sure that we have content that shows people how to do stuff that they need to do today, and that's a great reason to come back in the same way as you all will go back, I'm sure, to Google and YouTube and what have you for your personal learning. Then we started to answer some of these questions around, well, how am I doing? So what's my skill level now? Within Degreed, we're using something called Skills Review, which is a new way of evaluating skill levels. And of course, that brings a big benefit to the business, because suddenly we're able to start producing skills heat maps, which we've never had before at scale. We've had little patches of them, but actually starting to be able to look across the organisation and say, what skills do we have where and to what level? And this is really where your analytics and insights start to come into their own. And what we're moving into now is starting to answer that question of what should I be learning? So we're using something called role plans, which isn't necessarily a job title, but a collection of activities in the business. This is to signal to everybody, these are the things that we think the business needs to be able to do today and going forward. So it's relevant, right? I'm not learning something that in 6 months' time I find the organisation has decided to outsource and there's no requirement for it in the business anymore. We're also starting to link this year into performance management, so recognising and rewarding. I'll talk about that in a minute as well. And really starting to look at how broadly can we take this into the talent system. Because the people in our organisations don't care about all the sub-departments in HR. For them, it's all people experience. So being able to link up learning, careers, performance, reward, all of these things, perfect. That's really what they're looking for. And the holy grail for all of these is around lifelong learning. So lifelong learning as an organisation, so back to what Megan was saying, actually being a thinking organisation, right? A really sustainable organisation where we've constantly got people in the organisation who are ready for what's coming around the corner for us. And from an individual point of view, I have a livelihood, right? Because I've got skills that is something that people are willing to pay for. And we're also not just looking at our direct employees, the sort of 140,000 odd that we have in the business, but we're really expanding that out into our talent ecosystem. So contractors, third-party agencies, other people who perform work on our behalf as well. So the other thing then is thinking about how do you help people take control. It's one thing handing over the wheel to them, it's another thing about, do I feel okay with that? And I think this was a bit what we were talking about earlier. So we have done some work around learning how to learn, about helping people have the confidence. You know how to do this, you've got this, right? It's just that we haven't always made it very easy for you to do it in work. Helping them customise their own experience. Not everything that we know about people is captured on the system, right? So helping them understand what can I tweak to make that better and better for me. And really into the social learning side. So getting them to share ideas with each other, getting to share their experiences of how are they doing this, what works for them, and they can inspire each other. However, it's not all about just changing other people in the business, it's actually about changing our mindset as learning as well, and being brave and humble is really important in that. So this was kind of how we thought about learning in the past, right? And I'm sure this is true of many organisations still. So, you know, we know what people are learning, we know what's best for them, we're the ones who create and curate the content, and we assess whether it's any good or not, right? But again, for us to do that at scale, even if we wanted to, which we don't, would be impossible. So, we're now moving to, well, actually this becomes an open piece, everyone can see what everyone else is learning. Actually, I can figure out what I need. Sure, a bit of guidance, a bit of heads up from the organisation about where the organisation is heading, but actually, I'm a grown-up, I can figure out some of these things for myself. I can curate and create content, and this is something that we're really driving for in the business. Equipping people to do that, we feel that that's really important. And then everyone being able to see the assessments. So in the past, the assessments of learning, only learning people could see that because it was hidden in the back of a learning management system. Now it's the same as everything else, you know, everything that you do in assessing hotels, restaurants, you can see what everyone else thinks about it. So we as HR professionals need to let go of stuff. If we're handing over control to the learner, that means we're letting go of control ourselves. And for some of us, that is a really big leap, right? It can feel scary. And we went into this with the principle that we would have the minimum amount of governance, and that's it. And that if problems arose, we would deal with them by exception. but we're going in with a very, very low level of governance on this. And I have to say, touch wood, and I haven't checked my phone in the last hour, but we've actually not had any really major issues with this at all. And people really appreciate it and like the fact that this stuff is now open. So, point number 4. One of the reasons we know that people say, I loved going on a course, and they're talking normally about a face-to-face course, is because it was experiential, right? They like an experience. It's tempting when you go into this to suddenly have everything that's individualistic and just purely online. And that can take away from that, and it can make actually self-directed learning quite a lonely experience, and we didn't want it to be there. So what we've done is quite a few things. So we have created a character, a persona called Idris Lever. Lord Lever was the founder of Unilever. Idris, you can figure out for yourself, or we might have chosen him. And he's a mythical person in the business, but he's this very friendly, lively persona and actually has quite a big influence. He's the most followed person in Unilever, much to the annoyance of our chief HR officer. So keep your comms really human and get away from the corporate speak, really. And really bring it to life in the business. So, of course, when you're introducing something new, just doing in-platform comms clearly isn't going to work. You've got to reach out to people wherever they might be. And we've looked to make sure, as I talked earlier about, the overall integration with things like performance management, it's also the everyday integration for people. This is stuff that comes up in town halls, in meetings and so on. So not just working directly with the learners, but working with the people who organise and instigate things like that so that they can see the benefit that the learning, in this case Degreed, can bring into their daily working lives and the things that they do on the ground with people in their business. And lots of fun and different comms. So we had a very different tone around the way that we talk about learning and engage people with that. And make sure that you haven't forgotten about things like help desks, because if the experience falls apart there, then you're in trouble as well, right? So really thinking end-to-end, all the touch points that your learners might have with this. And with your line managers, making sure that they really understand, do you know what? This is going to drive business growth for you. It's going to drive performance, and here's how you can use it. Here's the great insights you can see about your team. You never knew that stuff before, right? These are the conversations you have. This is how you share content with each other, etc. So there's lots of ways of doing that. The other thing that we did is not just thinking about line management reporting teams and kind of formal structures, but start to create tribes. So we've done this around some skill areas, and this is something we're going to be moving a lot more. So where people have something in common with each other. It could be that they sit in the same place geographically. It could be that they're in the same function. It could be that they're actually focused on the same skill or a particular business initiative. But really getting that sense of being part of something and part of a movement gets away from the loneliness and into something that's actually more participative than going on individual training courses, because it has global reach to it. And really recognise and reward the behaviour. So I mentioned we're building this into performance management, which links directly into the formal reward and recognition in the business. But actually, and I've got some of my team in the room here, so shout out to them for that, they have really engaged the business in this in terms of setting up competitions between our countries. Who can get the most engaged leaders? Who can do the most innovative launch and engagement around this? And individual prizes for people who are doing really well in this area and are real kind of shining stars, shout outs from our leaders, all that kind of piece. And the more you do that, then the more the message obviously flows through to everyone else. This is what the business wants me to do, and this is the stuff that will get me some candy in some shape or form. And then finally, partnerships. So really building partnerships we've found is essential in all of this. And there's lots of different types of partnerships. So obviously partnering directly with your learners, so staying really, really close to them. We've got amazing analytics and insights. We've got learner behaviour dashboards. We understand at a macro level, and we can slice that down. But also there's no substitute for actually talking to people. So being on the ground, having conversations, and also talking to them online. You can see here we've got Yammer groups and things like that, which are really open, really informal. Anyone can go on with an idea, a question, some feedback, or what have you. And we're really responsive to that. The other thing that I think is really important is thinking about other networks that you may have. So we work very broadly with HR, but also through our talent teams and various other teams around the business, and help them lead for this in their area. And so for us, that was about opening out things like dashboards and metrics and feedback so they can see for themselves what's going on, rather than that just being the domain of the learning team. So they can see their progress, and they can spot where areas are that they really need to focus on, and what's working and what's not working. And we share those good news stories around, right? So they can inspire each other. And then partnering with the vendors. So I think for us, our relationship with Degreed has been super important with this. So definitely choose them wisely. So who's in the same place as you, who's aiming and designing their stuff that will be aligned with what your ambition is as a business and the culture change that you're looking to make. We've always volunteered to be early adopters and really engaged our people in this. And a lot of the stuff we go out with, we'll be saying to them, it's pretty experimental, right? We're not saying everything's going to be perfect first time, but it's out there and it's starting to add value. And actually, we want to understand from you what's working and where we can further improve these things. So we bring that user feedback directly to our vendors, and we have direct conversations as well between the two to make sure that, you know, it really is a partnership. And, you know, externally and internally, really be your vendor's advocate where obviously where you feel that's justified. But I think that's really important, because it's important to think about beyond just the, you know, commercial, contractual arrangements that you have, but where else can you add value, and then where can you get extra value then through your vendor. So let me just finish on the impact that we've seen here. So has any of this worked? And we started this journey, we rolled out the new platform and the whole, it wasn't just a new platform, right? The whole new approach to learning in Q4 of 2017. And this is what we've seen. So these are the numbers that really speak for themselves. Don't worry about the detail of them, but you can see we're really looking at, what we've been looking at here is how many times have people been logging in on average, and then how many times have they actually been going and doing something and viewing content, consuming that as well. Now, you might ask the question, well, how do you know that wouldn't happen anyway? Well, this was the only thing that we changed, and we'd seen a pretty steady level despite the amount of mandating and sending people on courses that we'd done over the few years before that. There'd been a very small amount of change. So this has been achieved, this idea. We've got more people doing more learning more often. When I say more often now, we're up to something like people who are going in and engaging with this. It's something like 14, 15 times a month, right? So this is really frequent for people. At weekends, we see the usage drop to around still over 20% of what we do in the week, not because we're asking people to work at the weekend, but because that's what people are choosing to do. They find it interesting, they find it engaging. For some people, that's how they like to manage it. And what we also know as people is not just the behaviour that's changed and the numbers which speak for themselves, but their perception of learning has changed. So we do an engagement survey every year, and the question that we had around accessibility of learning this year, the end of last year, 2019, was the second highest rise of any question in the survey, having been, again, pretty constant for a fairly long time. So it's not only that people are doing differently, but they're also recognising this is a different world that we're operating in now. And what we're also able to see is we're starting to see some of our capability levels shifting up, where we're measuring, we're starting to see some real shifts in that. And that, of course, is what it's really about, both from the individual and the business perspective. So let me just summarise. So a very quick whistle-stop tour, but we said you really start with the why, what's in it for them, and help a little bit with that as well in terms of broadening thinking sometimes. Find the number one problem and fix it. Be brave and humble, right? It is a leap for us. It requires us to change as learning professionals. Make sure you're still creating an experience, however you're doing it, done differently, but make sure that you're really creating an experience and integrating that, and really build the partnerships. And that's the story of Unilever so far.
My thanks to both Nicola and to Megan for those quite inspiring stories. It occurs to me, I don't know how many of you contributed to or have been paying attention to Donald, what's his name? Donald Taylor, yeah. His global sentiment survey for 2020. Number 2 in the results for 2020 is personalized and adaptive learning. It's actually pushed its way up to number 2 in the chart. So if you've got an interest in self-directed learning, and that's why you're here, then you are bang on the money about where the level of interest is, and where I would suggest, from what we've seen from the case studies here, that you can achieve some fantastic results. I'm going to take some questions, or we'll take questions in a minute. Just one thing I wanted to add about, I shouldn't have been surprised really when you all stood up and then nobody sat down when you'd been on a course. And then everybody sat down round about the Google search and the YouTube and all that sort of thing. I recently installed a video doorbell at home. And the only way, and the instructions came on a tiny little bit of paper and it had been badly translated from Chinese. And I hadn't got a clue. Where did I go? I went to YouTube. YouTube, there was a great video showing you how to do it. The reality was very different. Where the power of actually going to that space came was in the commentaries and all the comments that came afterwards. Things like getting the right battery, things like making sure the battery has the button on top and not the other one with a flat top, and things like don't wire it this way, do it that way. That all came from the community that had engaged. Okay, it was an ad hoc community, but there was an awful lot of people struggling with this video doorbell. I cracked it eventually by spending another 40 quid, but I got it to work. And that came out of looking at it on YouTube and then following all the commentary. So I wouldn't have been able to do that if I just relied on the aid that came with the piece of kit itself. So just another example of exactly what we've been talking about here. Have we got any questions from the floor? And 2 hands have gone up straight away. 3. So my head's going 1, 2, 3. I won't forget you. Don't let me forget you. And you were first.
Thank you. Congratulations, both of you, of the presentation. I have a question to Nicola regarding the impact of the usage of the platform in 2 other ways: in the formal learning programs, if it changes somehow, and in other types of self-directed learning outside the platform, meaning day-to-day or learning through the job, this kind of thing, if there's any impact on the learning culture, if I can say. Thank you.
Great. So the first question was, well, in fact, I'll answer the second part first, actually, which is the bit about, what about learning outside of the platform? So at the moment, we've got an experiment going on where we're integrating a mentoring tool onto this as well to help people connect up even more with people who might not already be part of their network in terms of people that they know through their current job or previous roles in the business. So that's kind of the 20, I guess, the 70, 20, 10. And then for the 70 bit, we've actually got an integration with, and this is, again, it's all about integration with a talent platform that allows people to sign up to do some project work in any part of the business up to 20% of their time, with line manager's agreement, which normally they give, to help them with practicing that. What we're also seeing is that as people are maybe getting together informally and learning about things, then the use of the platform becomes then supplementary to that, right? So it might then be, because it's easy to set up groups in there, you can just set them up yourself, that you've perhaps come across then a great video, you share that back with the group, there's some commentary on that. And in fact, similar to what Niall was saying, we get a lot of great comments as well, actually, around pieces of content and people then recommending other things, sharing them on and so on. So it's not everywhere. I don't want anyone to go away thinking that problem solved and I haven't got a job to do. Of course, my team, the rest of learning, we're always going to be aiming for more. But there's definitely been a shift of people starting to, I'm going to share stuff. I'm not just going to wait till the tutor on the front of the stage tells me something. Actually, I found something great and I'm going to share that with people. Or I'm going to give my perspective on something. And looking to kind of weave that into just normal everyday thing, team meetings and things like that, really, referring back to this stuff. So I hope that kind of answers your question. You're going to have to remind me of the first question now because I've forgotten it. Yes, so that's a really interesting one, actually. So what we've done is, as I'm sure most of you do, we have, as well as some internal people who will deliver programs, we have a lot of external partners that deliver programs for us. And we've actually taken them through how this works, right? So we've done some virtual sessions with them from all over the world, all the key companies that we work with, so that they can work with the learning people who own those particular curriculums to say, how else can we embed it? Because what we were finding, what we realised, and this was only relatively recently, is some of them were still like emailing links out to people and things. It's like, no, you can bring it into the platform, then it's captured in the record, then it's super easy. I mean, this was another great one, right? Why should I use this? Because we share things on WhatsApp. Well, because you know that point in 5 months' time where someone says, what was that great video that you had on something that showed me how? Then you know where to go to find it, rather than trying to search through, 10 different channels to find it again. So that was a why, by the way, that we used for sharing through the platform rather than outside of it.
Hi there, thank you very much for the presentation. I've very recently joined a local authority, very different to sort of more the financial services side I used to work in. It's a small organization, it's very much sort of classroom training led, there's very little e-learning, and really sort of brought in to set up their learning and development function, and I found your approach is very interesting. Have you completely stirred away from classroom training altogether, or is that part of the learning that you're offering, but self-directed by people choosing what they think is relevant for them?
Yeah, so I think it depends what you mean by classroom training. So when I was talking earlier about how facilitating something helps people to feel like they've still got some support to do learning, because if you kind of take all of that away, they're sort of just left in the abyss a little bit and they've got to sort of figure it out for themselves. So you can bring people together, you can say, this is what time we're going to all come together. You go off and do a bit yourself, have a read of something, or you can even bring stuff for them to read in the session. We've done something called coffee and papers in the past, where you bring stuff for people to read, everyone sits and has a coffee, everyone sits and has a read of something, and then you can still facilitate the discussion, so you can ask the opening questions, but making sure that it's not you doing all the talking, I guess, because that's the bit where you start going, oh, hang on a minute, I'm the teacher now, and then you've sort of lost the purpose behind the self-directed bit. And ask the right questions, get the discussion going, be okay with silences. I think, at first people might be like, oh, wait, I'm kind of waiting for you to tell me the answers, but actually you have to sort of ask the open questions, there might be a couple of people in the room who are more talkative than others. So you can still have the classroom, if you like, but what you're trying to do is change the way that people think about what learning at work or for work is. And some of that is just about talking and going, well, I thought this when I read that. What did you think? Oh, well, I thought this. Right, okay, well, and how am I now going to use that when I go back with my team? Have I changed the way I think a little bit? Have I churned over some cogs a little bit in my head that now makes my approach different? So I think from our point of view, it was a case of people still want to come and do something, but what you do is the key thing, I think, for us, anyway.
Yeah, and I think so we still do face-to-face learning, and we do virtual live learning as well. And so the shift hasn't been to stop doing that, although with some of those where we said, why are we doing it in this format, right? It really limits the reach of what we're doing, and actually there are some great formats we can use outside of that. So some of it did shift, but it absolutely still has a place with us. The difference is that's only a small part of what everyone does for their learning now, and there's so much more then that they can self-serve on, and even that learning they can still find through the same place. We're not sending them somewhere different to say, well, what are the programs, leadership programs, for example, that are running this year.
Thank you. One last question, and then we can go for drinks.
Hi there. I have a question for Nicola. Actually, two questions, if you don't mind. First of all, what was your biggest challenge in implementing this new way of learning within your organization? As I'm sure it wasn't very easy. And second question, if you were to give some advice to people who were looking to do something similar, what were your must-win battles that you had to go through?
Yes, so great question. Yes, there were lots of challenges. I think we're an organisation that that people tend to stay with for quite a long time, and although we had changed learning management systems over time, it was very incremental change on it. So, and most people would never go near the system unless they were sent a link which they had to click on to register for something or to open a piece of learning. There was no real culture of browsing, looking for things, any of that. So I think that was the biggest shift for people, because there are things that they like about how things are now. We saw that, and you talked about that as well, that telling organisation. So you just have to make the benefits of doing things different much more than the benefits of staying the same for them. So it was a cultural change. It was a frequency, because a lot of people were thinking, well, I just go on a course maybe once every year or 2 years or something. You know, which we have now with the people who are engaging with this. Really, we're getting in. You know, them going about 4 or 5 times a week in some cases. So I think that was the biggest hurdle to overcome. Was actually there's so much great stuff there. It's really relevant for you. You can use it wherever, whenever you want to, and it's there. And we will help guide you, and we'll give you support in doing that. But it's on you. No one's going to be sending you something saying, Nicola, you must go and learn this, learn this, learn this. There is still a bit of mandating, of course, for our regulatory stuff, but that's a very small proportion of what happens. And I think the biggest, if you're thinking about doing something like this, the biggest bit of advice I would give is, we went live with the whole office-based organisation in September of 2017. But we'd done a run-up over 6 months, gradually adding bigger and bigger groups in, and that was really important for us, because that's when we picked up some of the early things where people either didn't understand how to do something, or something wasn't working in the way that we intended it to. And so we caught those and dealt with them before it went across the organisation, because for some people their tolerance is really low. So if they go in and there's one thing which doesn't quite work right, they're like, oh, I'm never going there again, what a waste of time, right? Now, that's a cultural change in itself, right? Particularly when we're pushing into new areas and experimental. Not everything is going to work perfectly first time. But if you can avoid being in that position in the first place. So that would be my advice, would be, you know, start with smaller groups, but keep adding them. Don't just do one tiny pilot and then go big. When you're an organisation of our size, you know, then don't go big push. Build up to it and stay really close, spot what the problems are, deal with them really quickly, and this is where the partnership with the vendor comes, because that problem could come from all sorts of different places, and then by the time you're rolling out, you've got a good degree of confidence that things are working pretty much the way that you intended them to. And also, it tells you what do people not understand. So it might not be that there's a problem, it's just that there's a way that we're talking about something, or a particular activity within there that just isn't obvious to people, and you need to do a bit more to help them with that and give them a bit more support.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just going on to 5:05, which is our knocking off time. Thank you for your attention, your questions. Thank you ever so much to Megan and to Nicola. 2 fantastic stories there that I hope has given you some ideas to go away and start thinking about in your own workplace. Hope to see some of you back here tomorrow. This will be an interesting one, the graveyard shift tomorrow, where I'm chairing artificial intelligence. So we'll see how many of you make it to 5:05 on that one. But for now, thank you very much, and your appreciation, please, to Megan and Nicola.